I have personally encountered mis and disinformation throughout my life. Sage Jester is an arts production company that is on a mission to fight misinformation and manipulation. We blend artistry and expertise in order to get people entertained and informed. The company's ambition speaks for itself. We are creating something big, ambitious, bold, beautiful. We are almost 40 people at Sage Jester. These are all incredible, talented professionals who have been at the top of their game in all industries that they come from. The ambition here is to bring people together, to unpack the potentially difficult and complex subject of mis and disinformation. The most important thing is the well-informed citizen.
Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to this event with Intelligence Squared in partnership with the impact-led arts production company Sage Jester. Sage Jester create immersive experiences designed to entertain.
Do you feel immersed?
Yeah, do you feel immersed?
I know I do.
Careful what you wish for. They're there to enlighten and to help harness your internal BS detector. So I hope you're all feeling introspective this evening, giving you tools to question, challenge and pause. And obviously that's very important to me as a journalist. My name is Sophia Smith Galer. I've been a reporter. I'm also a content creator. And I am delighted to introduce our guest tonight to help us tackle how you can fight misinformation with satire. A lot of my business is fighting it with, I don't know, reporting that's often quite a little bit boring, if I dare say it. So I'm really excited to introduce Rachel Parris, who's an award-winning everything. Award-winning comedian, musical comedian, actor, improviser, presenter. Is there anything you don't do?
It's exhausting just reading it out, isn't it? I'm delighted to be talking to you. I'm such a big fan of yours. And
nice.
What you do is never boring. It's always interesting.
That's very nice. However, I'm very rarely on television.
Well, I'm not anymore. Television's died.
You've probably seen Rachel on a variety of different programmes, but most notably her phenomenal satire on The MASH Report and Late Night MASH, if you remember that. That had, yes, round of applause.
Thanks.
Over 100 million views for that programme. It's easy to forget that even though it was on TV, it was often the clips that would go viral.
Absolutely.
That people will remember and the impact that it made. You're one of the founding cast members of the award-winning improv group Ostentatious. I don't know how much you would satire the politicians of today in Ostentatious, but actually probably quite a lot.
We do, actually. Yeah, we have. We've had a few dubious politicians in the audience, actually, because I think a Jane Austen comedy seems like quite safe show to go and see at the Edinburgh Fringe.
And then you tear them apart.
Yeah, we have ended up kind of... we don't even plan to, but we always end up doing like massively liberal, like Tory bashing shows when we've got, like, for example, the actual Chancellor in the audience. But that I would say that's not like the chief satire that I do.
Springing on them when they least expect it is
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
the best way to do it, actually. You've been on Live at the Apollo, Would I Lie to You,
Yes.
Mock the Week, QI, and you're also regular on radio.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. Any fans? Woo! And the Now Show. But I want to rewind. I want to take everyone back to what Rachel's first satirical performance would have been. Do you remember?
Oh, I think probably before the MASH Report. I mean, I'd been doing comedy and little tours of stand-up comedy and musical comedy since 2010. I started stand-up in 2010. So about 8 years before the MASH Report started. And I would rarely do party political satire in my stand-up before the MASH Report. I would do socio-political stuff. I would talk about feminist themes a lot, and I actually a bit on Live at the Apollo, I've got about what makes a feminist. That was probably one of my first bits, to be honest. But I would say the MASH report was pretty much the beginning of me doing satire, which is a good example of like I didn't really plan to go. I've always been interested in politics, but I didn't bring it into my comedy. So it's a good example of being pushed into something and then finding that it suits you.
And did you always want to be a comedian?
No. My whole career is a total accident. No, but no one of my age wanted to be a comedian. Because I don't know, I didn't know that it was a job you could have. You know, I watched Victoria Wood and I loved her, and I watched Reeves and Mortimer, but you don't watch Reeves and Mortimer and think, oh, I could be that. You know, you just watch them and enjoy it. So I wanted to be a performer of some. I loved singing and I loved music and I really enjoyed acting, and I hadn't tried comedy. So, in my mid-20s, I eventually found comedy, but not satire yet. That came later.
Take us back then to the MASH report and how that started and how you were brought on board.
Well, it was a weird way of starting, I would say. The MASH report, the BBC, maybe 2 or 3 years before the MASH report hit the screens, the BBC put out a call for a new satire programme. They had a gap to fill, and all the major production companies, much bigger than ours, put forward pilot TV shows about half an hour long. And we were very much the underdog in that process. The others had Ramesh Ranganathan, Catherine Ryan, Joe Lycett, and even getting Nish Kumar. Nish was very little known when the MASH report started.
I remember, because I think that's how I found out about Nish Kumar.
Yes, exactly. And certainly the rest of us really weren't. Me and Ellie and Taylor had been on the circuit, but we weren't known. So... when they chose ours to be the one that continued to series, that was a huge shock, actually, to everyone involved, including the producers. And then we were amazed when we got a second series, and we were amazed when we got a third series, and then we weren't at all amazed when they cancelled us. We've been waiting for that to fall because they'd been very nervous through the last few series. And then we had this year where we thought it was over. And then Dave, the channel Dave, picked up Late Night MASH. And they were very nervous about it as well. And then we only had one series. No, we had two series.
Let's talk about why. Why would these channels find a format like that nerve-wracking? Yes.
Well... This is being streamed, isn't it? Okay. Because some of the conspiracy theories are true. I think there are links between the government and people at the BBC and people at BBC Studios, and I do think, I know that had an impact on what we were allowed to say. And Nish had weeks where he was ordered not to talk about things, and he said. And certain people, and he said, I will quit this week and you'll have to fill that slot somehow. And they were like, oh, fuck, okay. It was always a battle. When I was hosting, it was... it was a baptism of fire. The 8 weeks when I was host of Late Night MASH were the 8 weeks of Liz Truss's tenure. From literally the day she started to the day she ended, during which the Queen died. So there was an episode which we wrote in full and rehearsed in full, which was pulled and they just wouldn't let us do. So yes, there was a lot of nervousness, and I was making jokes about the government and about Liz Truss and there would be, I've been told, there were producers, in the background going, and the feedback always was, can we talk about party politics less?
What were you supposed to talk about?
Exactly. It was a strange experience because I feel like the whole point of the programme was always party political. It was always holding power to account, and that was the whole point of it. So I'm like, I don't really understand what they were going for if it wasn't that. But there was a lot. Let's just say there was a lot of nervousness.
For anyone who's sort of unfamiliar with how these programmes are actually made, how many writers would there be? Would there be a team writing? For the monologues, is it different to the rest of the show? Walk us through what it was like.
Yes, it is. It's a little bit complicated because that show, the MASH report and Late Night MASH, obviously you had like sort of sketches that were filmed. with costume and characters on a different day, like VTs that would be in the show. And then you had the presenter, the host's monologues, and then you had bits like my segment. And they were all separate and different writers. So the Daily Mash website did like all of the sketches, really, I believe. Nish had writers that he and Tom Neenan, they would write his bits. And I would work with a team of people. Jokes would be suggested by lots of people, but I had more control as I went through, and I fought to have more control as I went through.
Do you have to prove you're really funny first and then you accrue control?
Yeah.
How does it amass?
Yeah, it was really tricky because I was really taken on in that job as a character actress. In the audition that I made for the pilot, I was playing a reporter, and I wasn't, and it wasn't very satirical particularly. It was, but it was sort of about serving beer in pubs, and it wasn't me. And they screenshot. I did screen tested. They screen tested me. They screen tested me as like my name was Rachel Parris, but I was playing like a character, and that is how I began. Quite a heightened version of myself, and as time went on, it was like, well, this has got my name. And as soon as the second half of the series began, which was the sexual harassment piece, which went very viral, that was the first one that I'd worked on myself and co-written. And it was the first time I felt co-ownership of the piece. And from that point on, I was like, oh, this needs to always happen. But it continued to be a fight to make that happen. And there were weeks where I'd be like, I really don't want to do that joke.
Because the people in the room no one has the same sense of humour as someone else.
No, exactly. That's a complication of working on a satirical TV show, because it is a team and you aren't just representing yourself, you're kind of representing the views of the show to a certain extent, and you have to believe what people say. Like, you know, I'm a bit of a control freak and I found it quite hard, and I would have... My sort of instinct is like, let me just do it completely myself, but that doesn't make for the best piece. But then there are points where you have to draw a line and go, no, I'm not doing that joke. That's really upsetting. And there were times when there would be like a room of like 5 men going, no, but when you look at it from that, the joke is actually on the right side. And I'd be like, yes, but it was a joke about abortion. And I was like, it doesn't matter what side it's on. Like, as the only woman in this room, I promise you, anyone seeing that visual joke is going to be triggered by it. And it doesn't matter that, but actually, ultimately, we're holding power to account. And I'm like, you're just going to upset people, and I don't want to be responsible for that. So, yes, when you're doing TV, you're part of a big team, and there's a lot of compromise involved.
You mentioned one of your many viral clips that you've had.
Oh, yeah.
How many do you think you've had?
What viral clips?
I'm thinking particularly from your satirical content.
I think about 20.
Was the feedback for them always positive?
No.
No, what a surprise.
No.
Not surprising that the content is not fantastic. It's just people on the internet, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and in fact, you've turned even that into segments, haven't you? The kind of messages that you get online.
Yes, that's true. Yes, so the sexual harassment piece, which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, is with Nish Kumar's help, kind of showing people who say, like, oh, you can't even chat up a woman anymore. I suppose you can't even buy a woman flowers anymore since Me Too. The idea that the Me Too campaign has completely meant that men can't even approach a woman anymore. It was tackling that in a funny way. And that had really mostly positive responses, had very, very few negative responses from that. A few, but mostly it was good. The week after that, we did a piece that was dealing with Piers Morgan's interview with Donald Trump when Donald Trump was first in power, and Piers Morgan had gone very, very easy on Donald Trump and had asked him questions like, oh, your hair looks nice. Where does your mum come from? And so they had drawn There's no easy way of saying it. They'd drawn a cartoon of Piers Morgan rimming Donald Trump, to be honest.
Everyone know what rimming means in here?
If you don't, I'd say Google it later, but not now. Anyway, that cartoon was drawn, and that was an interesting one because that got I got the American attention, the attention of Trump supporters in America, and that was quite scary. So that was the first one. Like, I got really trolled by the American crazies, and I got like someone specifically wishing me breast cancer on Facebook, going, "You are a pig, you're a dirty pig, and karma will find you. Better get that mammogram early," which was weird more than anything else, and also, frankly, just sound advice. Medically, I was like, "Thank you, I will. And then I did one on incels. When I remember when we made the thing on incels, I thought everyone knew what an incel was, and they really didn't then. And even now, I'm like, surely everyone knows now, and they still. But we did a thing on incels, which I wouldn't do it the same way now. I think
That's interesting. Why? How did you do it?
I think it was.
Has the discourse around incels changed?
Yes. I think that it was not... Sorry, it's a hard question to answer. When I got to writing about violence against women and girls, it was a piece, it was in series 1 of Late Night MASH. I wrote it with Robin Morgan. It was in response to Sarah Everard's murder. And that was a really, really difficult piece to write for, I think, obvious reasons, finding comedy in something so horrific and the environment surrounding it. But by that point, I felt like I understood what my job was, and I felt like I understood how to deal with, comedically, an issue that is really, really serious and tragic. And I think when I did the piece on incels, which was fairly early on, I didn't grapple with how serious it was. I didn't grapple with the fact that women are dying because of the incel movement. I didn't deal with the fact that women are being beaten and harmed, and that also the sort of unimaginable damage that it's doing to men and boys. So I think I would have tackled it more seriously, to be honest, if that makes sense. It wouldn't have been any less funny somehow, but there's a way of finding jokes while still recognising how serious something is. And I don't think I would... Even then, I remember fighting. I remember someone in the writing team was like, it was going to be like, "Listen up, virgins." And even then, I remember being like, "I'm not saying that. That's not going to help. That's really not going to help. That's not what it is it?" So even then, I had a sense that it was more serious, but I would do a lot of it differently.
Are there any topics you do not touch with a barge pole?
Most. Most.
Okay. As in most in the news agenda, or you mean like sort of socio-politically, more widely?
Yeah, more socio-politically. The one thing, the luxury I had in the position I had on that TV show before I hosted it was that I only had to tackle one topic per week, and that topic could be a topic in the zeitgeist. It didn't have to be a topic that was in the news that week necessarily. That meant that I could choose a topic that I felt sure about, that I knew about, and that I felt able to represent. Because satire only works if you're sure and if there's certainty there. And if you have mixed feelings, if it's too nuanced, and my response to nearly all news stories is nuanced, it's very hard to write satire if you're like a bit on the fence. So I chose topics deliberately that I was not on the fence about, and that I felt able to represent. When I hosted, you have less that luxury. You have to just deal with what's in the news that week, so that's a bit more tricky. But there are lots of things that I did choose and would not choose to talk about because I don't feel I'm the best person, or I simply haven't got the energy.
Explain more about not being the best person. So, and I'm particularly thinking of, you have the advantage of a format in which there are lots of people, lots of talent who can possibly be used.
So I mean, obviously, it was a unique situation. So we had a team of performers who made up like a series-wide cast, if you like, and we all knew each other and we all knew our strengths. And then we'd bring in guests as well to Late Night MASH or the MASH Report. So, for example, in Late Night MASH, I was the host, and when the uprisings in Iran were happening, we really wanted to cover that, but I felt like there's probably someone better than me to do that. It's the kind of thing I probably would have covered in previous series, but I really felt like there was someone better. So I got in touch with Shappi Khorsandi, whose family was over there and who was much more informed and much more able to have emotional stakes in that story. And it was so much more powerful for it. My God, she was amazing, and she was very emotional on the day for obvious reasons, but the power of that really came through and made the piece so much better than if I'd done it myself.
And she must have had to take stock of, is there a risk? Is there going to be risk to my family if I do this segment? But equally, because you've had negative experiences of going viral, does that ever have a self-censoring effect? Would you, some of the areas that you don't want to touch, is it not necessarily because you don't have opinions about it, but because you're worried about the online pushback?
Yes, 100% that. Yes.
Really?
Yeah, of course I have. I have opinions about everything, but I don't. I don't think I ever did, but I don't feel strongly that I wish to satirise them all. For one thing, satirising them is one thing, and then having your opinions widely publicised is another. And there are comedians who live for that. That's absolutely what they do, and what they did before the MASH Report, and what they... Nish Kumar, who is so incredible at what he does, because he feels all of that, all of the things that he says, he feels it with every fibre of his being, and he could not live without proclaiming what he thinks on these issues, and that's what his audience love. And that's not me. I felt quite sometimes burned by doing that, and it's quite a choice, and it's a choice that I was very happy to make for that TV show, and who knows, I might make again. But I felt quite vulnerable.
Do they give you, as a comedian, digital security training or any kind of prep? Nah. I used to be a BBC journalist, and I remember my digital security training, which you think for a BBC journalist should be pretty good, because it's important, because obviously we could get into a lot of trouble if we don't keep things safe. And I remember we were told, don't pick up a USB stick if you see it on the floor and put it into your laptop. That was like one of the main pieces of advice that we got. And the second main piece of advice I got was not to share my password with anyone.
We're all learning.
Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that, because obviously you'd think that all journalists in every newsroom would get quite high-level training. I would go on to get excellent training when I was at Vice, digital security training. The new world, not only of satire, but of comedy more widely, comedians need it. From what you've said, comedians need it.
Yeah. I think all sorts of warnings and trainings. I think before, when that sexual harassment clip went viral, it was a really odd feeling. I was sort of suddenly the poster girl for that show, which was nice in a way. But I was also receiving messages, good and bad, from literally really all over the world. Like, the speed with which that clip went everywhere and people had very strong feelings about it was big. And I was going on all the programmes representing it and the show, and kind of being asked to represent the Me Too movement by myself with no media training. And then when we did like the Trump clip, being sort of asked to, you know, answer, and it's fair enough. But like, I do feel like I did not have the training for this. But yeah, I did feel like that.
There's also other training that it never occurred to me you need to deploy in satire, which is knowing how to not piss off Ofcom. Oh, yeah. So, during an election, what did you have to do?
in the lead up to an election, which our series weirdly often fell on, it's quite bad luck, you cannot make a joke about one party without making a joke at the expense of the other party. So that which is something we would hilariously ignore until an hour before the show started, and everyone would run in going, "Oh fuck! What are we going to say about Labour? Fuck!"
Because in the news world, there are literally programme teams who will have a running Excel spreadsheet, because if they were ever to be caught up and regulated by Ofcom, they could have the receipts and say, "Look, we really worked to our greatest effort in order to demonstrate balance." And it never occurred to me that your programme would have to do it as well.
We did, even if it wasn't completely even-handed. You had to always have some joke at the expense of the other side. And then there's also fair dealing, which is you can only use a clip in the show that has a political bent if you comment on it. You have to critique it in some way. So it doesn't really matter what you go on to say about it. You have to include a comment in the script. And again, we'd always add them at the 11th hour, just before on air, where, if you have a clip of, say, Keir Starmer speaking in the House of Commons or something, you'd have to say, what an interesting chat he's making. Or you'd have to say, well, it doesn't look like many people agree with him. Or sometimes they were really mundane, just like, oh, that tie doesn't go with his trousers. Or something. It was just really strange little things you had to add that were a tick box exercise.
But presumably when Piers Morgan was depicted rimming Donald Trump, that was fair dealing not required because it was original artwork.
Original artwork, yeah.
What about, was anyone ever litigious? Anyone not like how they were represented? Can you say?
I think that was kept away from me, not as far as I know. I mean, I am sure people didn't like how they were represented. I think the programme had complaints. I did a piece about Jacob Rees-Mogg, which incorporated him using his Catholic faith to pass policy, which, in my opinion, is inhumane. And I think we had complaints from some Catholic quarters about that. I think we had complaints from lots of people, but I don't know how litigious it was particularly. But for all I know, that is what it was. Maybe Boris Johnson finally sued us for saying on screen, Boris Johnson is a racist and a liar, which the BBC, I can't stress this enough, let us do. It's like, yes, they finally decommissioned us, but they let us do that. So
I suppose that's what's surprising about what you've said, because how can they let you do stuff, and indeed encourage you by commissioning you, and then get very nervous about it?
I know. It's a really odd thing to imagine, because you've got so many layers at any channel, but particularly at the BBC, going right up to, well, government, really. So, you've got the producers who want to do one thing. You've got the commissioner, and the commissioner really, really supported the show. The direct commissioner, who initially allowed us to do the show. And then you've got other commissioners going, we probably can't say that. And then there's a level above them. And one person says yes to one thing without the others knowing. So it's not as clear-cut as it should be, but it does mean you occasionally get away with things.
Do you think comedy audiences have changed at all in the last few years? I'm particularly thinking of whether they've changed after significant events like Brexit or like COVID or like, Lettuce Prime Minister.
I think that I'm going to talk more about live satire as part of stand-up live now. I think that while people do have a thirst for satire which satisfies the need for catharsis, to just join in with feeling angry and going, yeah, that person's a knob, and they shouldn't have done that, and there is that thirst. I also think that there are some things that have happened that are simply too bleak. And actually, weirdly, Brexit, even though that doesn't you would think Brexit doesn't tick the boxes of that sort of humanitarian crisis. It's not a sort of live or die tragedy situation. Brexit I've found when I'm touring around is so divisive. And even if you've got a room which majority of them agree with your point of view, it's like bums clenched, don't want to talk about this, it's divided my family, I hope she doesn't talk about it. And it's weird. There's a lot of topics that I think people are too sad about for you even to satirise. There's some topics that are big ones that you can satirise, and I've just found personally, it might just be me, there's ones that I think it's sort of too serious.
But when I've seen so many of your monologues, it's not like there's a one-liner. No. There's a rhythm to it. And there are moments, particularly in the one where the misogyny one, where you mention what happened to Sarah Everard, you address that moment with the gravity that it demands. And then it's like this sort of really, it is rhythmic, and then you will at some point deploy the one-liner where it feels suddenly like it's a safe moment to do so and there's relief again, and then might push back and forth. Does that go into the crafting of it as you're writing it?
Yeah, it did. That was very hard to write. I knew what I wanted to achieve, and I was also like a few weeks post-birth as well, so I was very emotional.
You went back to MASH Report that quickly?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't want to, but that's when it was on. So,
Showbiz.
I filmed one piece 4 weeks after giving birth, and then that one was about 7 weeks after. And the writing of it was harder. Presenting it is fine, but the writing of it took so much brain power, but it also was an amazing opportunity. It sounds weird because it's so tragic, but I was so grateful to have the opportunity to speak about that when it happened, because I desperately wanted to. And I worked with Robin Morgan on it. The producer, Chris Stott, also contributed to it. And for me, the only way it can work is to give time to the seriousness of it and honour what it was. And then, there's a knack to it, just going in and out of, like, there is room for humour because the response to it from the government was so shocking and ridiculous and absurd, and then go back into the seriousness of it. One of the biggest criticisms that I get from, I'm going to call the haters, is people going, from the beginning of the MASH Report, going, this isn't comedy, it's not comedy, look, they're calling this comedy, it's so serious, she hasn't made a joke for 30 seconds. But that was always the point, because we were always tackling issues that were serious. So no, it was never going to be a laugh minute. And lots of satire can't be if it's tackling issues like that. That's what made it
distinctive as a programme as well. In a country where, like a lettuce can outlast a prime minister's reign, or where like an MP, someone's like, is that guy watching porn in the House of Commons? Oh yeah, he is.
Tractor porn.
Yeah.
Which I think is adorable.
In a country where stuff like that happens, is it easier to satirise, or is it harder because the real life material is so farcical?
I mean, I think there's been a lot of lines drawn between Trump and Johnson. I realise Johnson is old news, although I do feel like you never know when he's going to come back.
It's true.
I think that the absurdity was matched, between Trump and Johnson, that them as like bumbling comedy characters that shouldn't be taken seriously. And it's amazing that they got where they did.
They were comedic archetypes.
They're comedic archetypes. So in that way, that absurdity isn't unique to Britain. On the other hand, I think that our sense of humour, I realise there is a dilution there because we're seeing all of the American humour and the Americans are seeing ours, and the line is not as big as it used to be. But I do think our sense of humour has that ability to be more arch and more dry, and I think that can really help. I think we don't always have to be kind of grinning about it.
People often talk about the Brits as being maybe more sarcastic. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's the case?
I think that probably used to be true. I think we do irony better than the Americans. I'm pretty sure we do. But as I say, I think that styles are blending much more now.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because your satirical career blossomed on TV. And nowadays, if a young satirist wants to get a career, like, good luck if you want to be on TV.
Yeah.
But presumably they're consuming, I'm hoping they're watching the backlog of satirical content from the golden age of satire and telly. But they're also watching online content. They'll be watching content from Americans. Is it homogenising slightly because it's sort of this big online gloop of comedy in the Anglosphere, or not?
In a way, watching like YouTube and social media clips is now offering them more. The backlog is much more available to them than it was to me and people before me. Like, because you'd have to just find tapes of it, or it might come on television in a repeat. And now there's like, you know, comedians from the past whose clips have like gone viral again 50 years later. So actually the younger generation have much more access to their forefathers than we did, or others, or people older than me did. But yeah, it's television is the landscape is changing obviously so much. Lots of satirical programmes aren't being commissioned now. Mock the Week has gone. Obviously, it's changing. So if you're making satire now, you're much more likely to be making it on your own, which is hard, which is really hard. But I was saying to you before the show, the advantage of that, of working on your own, is it does mean that you don't have to make that compromise of balancing your voice with the opinions of producers. You can like every joke that you put out because it's yours, and if you don't like a joke, don't say it. You can only represent your own opinions and not be curtailed by a channel. And that comes with an enormous amount of freedom, but it does come with a lot of work as well.
Thinking about the premise of this evening, which is the function that satire can have, not only really in challenging misinformation, but providing community. What are examples of community making that you think you've witnessed from a career in satire?
I think that for me, the most powerful pieces that I did that had the biggest response were around sexual harassment, violence against women and girls, sort of feminist pieces.
To speculate about why, I would say it's because we didn't see much of that. It was new.
Yeah, it's weird because when we did the sexual harassment piece, Me Too felt like old news. It had been a few months and I felt like I'd seen everything that had been done about it. So I was really surprised when it took off. But it turns out there hadn't been as many perhaps as I thought, or none that caught the imagination. But I would say none of what I did caught, there wasn't a direct community, but like I saw, it sounds really weird, but like in the comments, there's a world in the comments, and they say don't read the comments. But sometimes there is community in the comments, and I saw that build from those clips. Women supporting women, men supporting women.
I always read comment sections and book reviews. I'm a brave sadist. Yeah. But you don't get to partake in the community if you don't see what people are saying.
It's true. It's a weird thing with comments, though. Like, I had one recently. I commented on... Sorry, this is probably by the by. There was a guy online doing a video, which he's like a sort of pickup artist, and he was doing how to talk to a girl. And he said if a girl says, oh, I'm interested in reading books, his advice was... he said, well, your instinct might be to ask her what books, but don't do that. Tell her what you do. Tell her what books you read. You might say something like, well, the first book I read voluntarily was when I was 25 years old, and it was about closing a deal. And I was like, oh, my God, you read The Art of the Deal when you were 25, and that's the only book you've ever read. And I just commented, like, mate, you're out here telling men not to ask a follow-up question to a woman, but instead to turn it right back on themselves. And that's all I put. But then, for some reason, that comment took fire, and it wasn't a particularly inspirational comment, but all the comments underneath it, of which there are hundreds, say much harsher things and much worse things.
To him?
To him. And like, this guy's a bellend, this guy's a knob. Like, and don't get me wrong, I think he is. But I wouldn't say that online. I wouldn't choose to say that, to put that out. And that's like those comments are representing you then. And so you either delete the comment, which looks as though you regret it, which I don't regret my comment.
I know, but what they've all said isn't your fault.
I know, but it feels like you're all tied in together. You're all under one sort of comment thread. Anyway, sorry, this is probably off topic.
It's a new phrase that I've learned called comment jacking.
Yes, exactly. Comment jacking. Yeah, that's a useful term.
I don't know if I would describe you as comment jacking, though, there. You were just... I mean, ironically, he didn't really know how to close a deal, did he? If he thought that was a way to speak to a nice lady he was on a date with. What is a bit you wish you had written?
Right. One of them is American, actually. John Mulaney has a fantastic bit from about 5 years ago now that's about Donald Trump, that's about, he says, the current administration is like if there was a horse loose in a hospital. Has anyone seen this? Some of you, only one or two of you. Oh, it's so brilliant. Look it up. It's on YouTube, obviously. Actually, that special is on Netflix as well. And yeah, it's just such a perfect bit describing the chaos of the Trump administration. A horse loose in a hospital. And he goes, sometimes it's when you don't hear the horse that it's the most scary. Where is he? What's he doing? And they're like... And people go, and he says, and people think they can understand your situation. They're like, oh, well, I've seen a goat in a post office, and there's nothing like that. This is a horse loose in a hospital. It goes on for like 5 minutes, and it's perfect. It's perfect comedy, and also. I'm not naming it. I love British satire as well. I think the thick of it is just phenomenal and perfect. But in terms of a bit. There's also a bit in response to an American and US oil spill in 2010 done by Clark and Dorr, two Australian satirists. And they're a bit like Bird and Fortune, and that's worth YouTubing, where they're like doing a mock political interview, and they just keep going, well, the front fell off. And he goes, what happened to the boat? Well, the front fell off. Well, why did the front fall off? Oh, we didn't mean for it to fall off, but it did. It's perfect. I can't emulate it, but please just go and watch it because it's perfect satire.
And here in the UK,
yeah,
who is it? Who was some of the people that you most admire in this?
Well,
space?
as I say, I didn't grow up loving satire. Like I grew up loving stupid, mad stuff like Reeves and Mortimer, all the sketch groups, really. But as I've got older, I do think Armando Iannucci was doing fantastic things. I like the absurd version of satire, which was like Brassire in the day-to-day. So it's not direct satire, it's almost satire of satire. And as I say, I think... Oh, and Rory Bremner, which... What he was doing then seems old-fashioned now because simply doing impressions feels like an old-fashioned genre. But what he was doing was good satire, and he gave this platform to Bird and Fortune as well, who I loved. Obviously John Oliver, but he's mainly doing American politics. Samantha Bee over in the US as well. But yeah, there's lots. But
it makes sense that the origins for you were in sort of silliness.
They really were.
Because that's how satire begins. It's seeing the silly.
Yeah.
And the sort of unfathomable in what's happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to say, when people ask comedians who their favourite comedians were, it's not necessarily like what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily do... Like, I love Victoria Wood, and some of what I do is a bit like Victoria Wood, but most of the time, like, I loved watching stupid sketch duos, and that doesn't represent what I do at all, but it doesn't mean I don't... That's what I love watching.
We have one more question before we go to an interactive moment of this evening where you will be posed with a question, 2 even. But until that, I want to ask you, if you had to satirise... I mean, I was tempted to ask you, I'm going to say it. We'll end on a lighter note. Before I do that, yesterday's speech from Keir Starmer, if you had to figure out how to satirise the island of strangers, can you?
Off the cuff?
Not off the cuff, but... if you were doing the MASH report this week, you'd have to...
Would I cover it?
Well, you'd have to,
You'd
wouldn't
have
you?
to. You'd have to and you'd want to. And
Yeah.
yes, it would be easy to satirise because he's sort of gone further into caricature than he began. So
If it looks like reform and smells like reform.
yeah. It would be, and using very handy phrases to pick out, to absolutely tear apart.
And if you had to satirise one cheeky conspiracy theory...
A cheeky conspiracy theory?
What one would you pick?
I would pick something to do with the anti-vax movement, I think, because there's so many... ludicrous things said that have sort of started over in America, and some of the wellness movement is linked in with it, but have absolutely spread over here, and is so dangerous. And I would want to, again, it's one of those topics I would want to tackle. I mean, measles is back, and some of those conspiracy theories they're literally laughable. So I'd quite like to have a lot of fun with them.
On that note, if you see anything about measles coming back from Rachel, you know what it's from. We now have a question for you. We have 2 multi-choice questions and a QR... Oh, there we go. A QR code has magically appeared behind me. You're going to scan it on your phones. Click the link as well if you're watching our live stream.
I'm loving some of the confused faces in the crowd, and I don't blame you. Like, we've got to do what?
Grunt when you've been able to scan the QR code. So thank you. You'll be asked 2 questions. I'm going to read them out as well, hopefully while you're doing them. The first one is, what do you think is the biggest strength of satire today? A, holding power accountable. B, bringing people together through laughter. C, helping us process tough realities. Or D, making difficult truths go viral. I think people are answering.
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
so many people are wrong.
We privately spoke through what we thought the answer would be earlier. Hang on.
That's really interesting.
So the highest proportion of votes have gone to making difficult truths go viral. So that's a very sort of impact-led answer, I would say. Holding power accountable. As a journalist, that's the first thing I went for. And then you persuaded me to think I was wrong, because that is sort of what journalists should be doing. As opposed to satirists, if we're doing our job. And it was C. It's what you've been saying.
In my opinion,
repeating the word catharsis.
Yes, in my opinion, of course, what satirists want to do, probably, apart from making people laugh, is to hold power accountable. That's sort of the goal. But maybe this is really cynical, but I don't think very often the people who are in power are changing their policies because of a piece of satire. Rarely. Maybe it might change like the mood of a group, and therefore that somehow impacts voters to write to their MP, and maybe that impact somehow gets into policy change. But I do think that the community aspect that you were talking about is really, really important. And I think if there's a shared moment on an issue that affects lots of people and people feel alone and lost and angry about it, if you can find a piece of satire, I think that's what satire is brilliant for, which encapsulates how you feel and can inspire people because of that laughter and makes you feel like those feelings are shared. I feel like that definitely does happen, whereas actual changes and holding power to account, I think, rarely happens. But I have seen B happen.
Yes. Okay. Question number 2. Which, going to have to scan again, folks. Which is more dangerous in today's culture? A, misinformation spread seriously. B, misinformation spread as a joke. C, people who can't tell the difference. And D, social media algorithms. Misinformation, of course, is when a falsehood is shared and the person sharing it does not necessarily know it's a falsehood. They've been led to believe it. Otherwise, it's disinformation.
Ah.
Yes. And there's even malinformation. Don't ask me to define that, I just know it's a word.
That's really interesting. There's a lot of overlap, I suppose. Yeah, I think that.
You all love D.
No comment.
Social media algorithms.
That does feel, obviously all of them, but that does feel true, doesn't it? Like, so many of the huge divisions between people, like the ingrained political and socio-political opinions that they have been formed because of what they've been shown repeatedly and supposedly with evidence and backed up by fact. I know, but by the end of, I left X now, but X got so weird by the end for me. It was just repeatedly showing me like really, really divisive stuff on like Israel and Palestine and the trans rights and like just the most like real thin end of the wedge stuff on either side to try and stoke some kind of feeling and make me keep scrolling and angrily punching at it. And it was so odd to really see it doing that. And you just think when there's divisions in, say, your family even about those things, you're like, well, there's bound to, because if that's all they've been shown and all you've been shown is this, it's so persuasive because you feel like you know everything about that issue, but you don't. You've only seen one side of it.
I also like how everyone voted because when people share misinformation, it's not really their fault. It's a misconception that, oh, this person shared this thing, they must be an idiot. No, anyone can share it or be tricked or be quite vulnerable to it. D was the only answer there that was sort of holding the tech bros to account, which they absolutely should be. So you did get that answer right, in my view. Please, a big round of applause for Rachel.
And for Sophia.
Oh, thank you. This isn't the last conversation we have tackling misinformation. If you're available on the 19th and 20th, I will be doing interviews for the 2 other storytelling methods that can tackle misinfo. Tonight was satire. I believe the 19th is academic research into online radicalisation. Spicy. And then the second night, I'm going to be speaking to another journalist, if you can handle that. It's been a real delight being here with you all tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.